Good afternoon, everyone. This is Danny Haiphong, and it says I'm starting early, but actually I'm starting exactly at the time I wanted to. Unfortunately, I had some issues on the StreamYard and had to change some destinations. But for those of you who are here, welcome. I hope I sound okay on this Saturday afternoon. This was something didn't have planned, but I thought it would be important to talk about some of the developments that have emerged over the past few days with regards to this very hot button issue of censorship. So while you're here, please do like the stream. Please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And of course, the way to support this show is through patreon.com/Danny Haiphong for any monthly amount. So if you are on any other platform, if you see this on Twitter, if you see this on Facebook, please do go to the Left Lens YouTube channel and drop a like. And that goes for all of you who are viewing this wherever you are. And if you're on YouTube, of course, please do drop the like while we get started here. So I wanted to come on here and talk to you all about my reactions to this response, this heavy-handed response, this suppression that we are seeing from what a lot of people call big tech, but the corporate media monopolies, the social media monopolies, the search engines, etc., and how these platforms are essentially censoring all voices who question the dominant hegemonic imperialist narrative about the Russia Ukraine war. So anyone who challenges the dominant narrative, who doesn't toe the line on this new Cold War orientation, who doesn't take this opportunity to just jump on the anti-Russia bandwagon, we are being actively censored. Now, I want to talk to you all about the context for this because this isn't something that's necessarily new, but it certainly has intensified. And it's not something that I am a stranger of or that we at Black Agenda Report are a stranger of either. So, if you all remember, and I know that probably all of you have been following this debacle called Russiagate for quite some time, for quite a many years now, since the 2016 election. But right after the election of Donald Trump, there was this shady organization, prop or not, that Washington Post, the outlet of Jeff Bezos himself, came out with this report claiming that independent media outlets on the so-called far right and the so-called far left were nothing but dupes of Russia. And they came out with a long list of independent media, from Counterpunch to Consortium News and to Black Agenda Report, Naked Capitalism. There was a long list of outlets that were labeled dupes of Russia. And the whole idea behind this prop or not shady organization that didn't have any sources, didn't have any authorship that could be transparently understood. It was really this anonymous grouping that was saying that they had this information that we were all dupes of Russia and that we were agents of the Kremlin and that we should be not only monitored but suppressed. And that is exactly what happened. So right after that, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, on and on and on began to censor in their algorithms the work of outlets that challenged the dominant imperialist narrative, that spoke out against Russiagate, that spoke out against war, such as the US war on Syria, that defended WikiLeaks. So basically, anyone who countered the establishment in any way was censored and suppressed. But this was a more subtle form of suppression. It was one that could be gotten away with pretty easily because not many people understand what that experience is like unless you are producing media yourself. So we at Black Agenda Report understood quite well, and Glenn Ford, prior to his death, took it as a badge of honor to be given this label dupes of Russia, because it meant that you were doing something right, that you were angering the right people, and that your message was doing what it was supposed to do, and that you were more likely correct than not on the pressing issues such as imperialism. So we took it as a badge of honor, yes, but the consequences were pretty grand. We lost viewership, we lost readership, and this goes across the board for outlets like Mint Press News. And of course, the so-called state affiliated media, quote unquote, like RT, Press TV, etc., they went through not only this kind of censorship, this subtle kind of censorship, but even before these platforms started to be taken down wholesale by YouTube, they were also being not just suppressed, but forced to register for the FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act. Many of these outlets like Press TV were forced off of YouTube before all of this started happening to RT, and essentially, these outlets were already being marginalized to an even greater degree than those of us independently who are not supposedly affiliated with the Russian government, but are being attached to Russia, quote unquote, state affiliated media or Chinese state affiliated media. There was a much more intense response already to RT, Press TV, and these outlets. You may remember that not too long ago, I had a panel on my program with Lee Camp, with Jingjing Li of CGTN, and with Richard Medhurst, who works for Press TV. And we talked about this repression against state affiliated media and how important it is to understand and oppose. And now we are seeing exactly why. Now, all of these platforms, these corporate big tech monopolies that control the media landscape here on search engines, on the internet, in the cyber space, they have taken down RT, they've taken down RT America. Before that, they have taken down so many programs from allies, comrades, people in this struggle that do independent media, like Abby Martin, Lee Camp, people that I respect, people that I have worked with in the past. And a lot of people lost their jobs, including people like Lee Camp. I knew the people over at the New York studio, and I do feel very bad for them that they have lost their jobs, that people in the DC studio, people all across the RT America family, and now we have all of RT banned from the YouTube airwaves in the United States, in Europe, and this is an unprecedented move in a lot of ways, especially since it is coming under conditions of war. Now, the United States and its NATO allies, its EU allies, have no right, should have no say in what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Now, as we talked about, we know that the US, the EU, NATO have a huge hand in precipitating this crisis and this war. But nonetheless, they really have no right to dictate affairs elsewhere, although we know that imperialism, US led imperialism, US EU imperialism, they reserve the right in their minds, in the ruling class's minds, to dictate affairs abroad however they see fit. And this is all part of that, right? So by sending a message like banning RT, these forces of endless war, of endless austerity, are sending the message that at any moment when the rulers see fit, they will take down, they will eliminate, they will erase the voices that they find to be a nuisance, that they find challenge their dominant narratives, their ideological worldview, that ultimately pushes for further and further escalations and further war. So that's essentially what we're seeing here. And it's really unfortunate because I've done work for RT. I haven't worked for them formerly. I have worked a very short period for Press TV. I do have a relationship with CGTN. I do freelance op-eds for them. And so, although I have never worked for RT, I've been to the New York studio many times for interviews. The people were wonderful there. I don't know if she's there anymore, but a good friend, Priya, who worked there as one of the producers. And it was a great experience, right? And I started doing that when I moved here to New York City about 5 years ago and did a number of appearances. I was on Chris Hedges's On Contact. I made more than a few just news appearances going to the studio, even just to comment for 5-10 minutes on some kind of political development. I did a great segment with Anya Parampil about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and her relationship with Nancy Pelosi. This was way before, this was 2018, way before it was okay to criticize the squad. And we were doing that on her program when she was the host of In Question. And so seeing all of that just poof go away, right? At least on YouTube, to not have that kind of accessibility is really chilling. And that's what it's meant to be. It is meant to be chilling. You saw Abby Martin in Empire Files on Twitter talk about her work on Breaking the Set also gone. And she worked for RT and she did 600 plus episodes and it's gone now, right? So that in and of itself, this is what we talk about when we talk about materialism, dialectical materialism and Marxism. We believe as Marxists that material reality shapes ideas. So when the ruling class and its dominant system, right, when capital asserts its hegemony, asserts its dominance in this realm of the media, right, when it uses the media as a tool of repression like this, it sends an incredibly strong message to people who are trying to go against the grain, trying to challenge this narrative, trying to make, honestly, in the most general sense, make the world a better place and do so in a way that actually confronts power, then power comes right back, as we see here, and attempts to silence. And so I cannot say, and I am thinking about other alternatives as well to get on some of these other platforms when time allows, because I'm not sure how long I have given this kind of treatment, right? Because now what message this sends is that we cannot talk about certain issues, right? We're not allowed to talk about what we really think about Russia's military offensive in Ukraine. We're not allowed to talk about the Ukraine side of the atrocities that are being committed in this war that honestly started in 2014, 2015. We're not allowed to talk about these things. We're not allowed to point out that the Ukraine security forces, the military forces in Ukraine, the National Guard, has been embedding itself or has embedded literal Nazi forces into its military, into its apparatus, into its infrastructure, right? And we can't talk about how these propaganda flashpoints, these propaganda sort of situations, these instances, for example, like in Mariupol with the so-called maternity hospital being bombed by Russia, and how that's being used to say, oh, well, Russia's bombing children and mothers, when in fact, Azov regiment, the Nazi force inside of Ukraine's National Guard, actually emptied out that hospital and used it as a staging ground for their own military operations. And that's why it was bombed. And that's why 17 people were injured. And none of them have been verified as mothers or children, etc. It's because it is propaganda, right? The propaganda reminds me right now of an intensified version of what happened in Libya, the NATO operation in Libya, when everything that was coming out of the corporate media was some version of a lie. It was some exaggeration, some very theatrical exaggeration that was meant to shape our opinion about Libya. And now the same is happening about Russia. This time, however, unlike Libya, where Libya was being assaulted by NATO and its proxies, where NATO countries, the Gulf countries, Israel, etc., were arming jihadists, were arming the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and all of these other armed bandits, arming them to swarm Libya to overthrow the government. Unlike at that moment, Russia is on the offensive here. And I mean, that is also debatable given that Russia has been standing by on its border, watching Donbass be slaughtered by Ukraine's military. But in this particular operation, yes, Russia is on the offensive. So that's what makes, I think, a huge difference in terms of the scale of the repression that we are seeing. So it is necessary in the minds of the ruling class right now to get rid of RT and all of these so-called Russia affiliated media channels, because the US and NATO and the EU, they desperately want to keep control of the narrative, as they see this opportunity to weaken Russia to the greatest possible degree. And so some have said, okay, this is why we disagree with Russia's military offensive. We may not know about the scale, we may not know about too much about what's happening on the ground because of all the propaganda. We know that war is not a pretty thing, but also this is giving credence to the United States, NATO, the EU, etc., to repress Russia even further and take these kind of steps. And now, my position on that, my opinion on that, is that we do not yet know why Russia decided to intervene as quickly, as steadfastly, and as strongly as it has, right? It's said in the most broadest sense that this was necessary because everything else was out the window. There was no diplomacy, and there have been many warnings. But I think that there may also be a timing factor here in regards to certain things we just cannot know in terms of how things were going to develop with the war on Donbass that Ukraine was waging, as well as possible NATO membership and escalations in that way. So my opinion on this is that it's very sad and it's very infuriating in a lot of ways, right? Because censorship, right? A lot of people talk about censorship as this broad, just universal thing, and right, some people call themselves free speech absolutists, and I can respect that to a certain degree. But I think what we're seeing here in this particular instance is that not just that we need to defend those who are being suppressed ourselves, those who are trying to get out an alternative narrative, but we also have to talk about our security, our capacity to do this work. How do we protect ourselves? How do we ensure that we are able to continue to do this work under really warlike conditions? Because that's how I see all of this. I mean, class struggle is war, right? And this is part of it. This is part of a class struggle. It's part of imperialism attempting to keep control of the narrative. And so, one thing that I always think about in these moments too is how countries like Iran, like Russia, and especially China have operated in this environment of intense repression, of intense imperialist aggression. And I think about how there was a lot of talk among some friends and comrades of ours about China when Russia was cut off from MasterCard, was cut off from Google Pay, and all of these things. And a lot of people started to have disruptions in their just public affairs. They couldn't take transportation, they couldn't use their cards anymore. It was a disaster. And people were talking about how, well, in China, right, WeChat Pay and these kind of institutions, Alipay, you don't have to worry about that. And so that gets me thinking about this great firewall, and people criticize it all the time. Oh, well, Google and Facebook and YouTube can't operate in China, and is what makes it repressive, right? That's what makes it anti-free speech. But now I think about the situation wherein now, where information is controlled in these private hands, and now these private hands are saying, we're not allowed to talk about certain things, or we're going to take you off. I start to think about how China is actually very smart, and how these other countries are smart to not allow private Western, foreign, imperialist media corporations, big tech corporations dominate their political and economic landscape, because that makes it just that much harder for them to remain sovereign, independent, and to continue on with their own pathways for how to develop and organize their societies free of aggression. And so I think that's why free speech is complex. And I said that free speech never existed in the United States. And I don't think we can deny that, given that the United States was founded upon one of the most brutal systems of colonialism and chattel slavery that capitalism has ever wrought upon the planet. But we also have to understand that this saying that is not to say that we shouldn't defend people who are being repressed right now, right? We shouldn't defend RT. We shouldn't defend people who've lost their jobs, people, journalists, those outlets who are maybe affiliated with Iran and Russia, but have actually given platforms to a lot of alternative and independent voices, that we shouldn't defend them, or we shouldn't defend Julian Assange, or we shouldn't defend anyone who has attempted to get the truth out about empire, about war, about capitalism, about white supremacy, what have you, right? Of course we should defend them, and we should defend them. Of course we should defend them on their right to do this, on their right to speak, right? But I think that there's a difference between this concept of free speech, which was a concept created by European bourgeois, Western, and American imperialists. It was a right for them to have, so they could have maximal say, the maximum say in how affairs were dictated, both the state level, the government level, at the economic level, social level. It was all about maintaining their interests, right? And extending that to however many people was necessary to maintain their rule. But that's not really what free speech is. And I don't think that's what many people think free speech is. I think people really do think that free speech is this pluralistic thing where everyone has it and it's endowed to you as a human. And sure, it could be considered this universal human right in the abstract sense. But when you live under a system of very specific and concrete social relations, you have to operate and understand yourself and position yourself within that. And so that's what I mean by free speech has never existed, because unless we live in a society where there isn't a class above a class, right? Where there isn't class rule, then we're not going to have free speech for everybody. And this includes on the socialist side, right? I don't support anyone who says that Cuba should open their doors to right-wing media. We've seen what that's done in Venezuela, right? I don't believe that Cuba should do that. I think Cuba should make sure that right-wing media that calls for the overthrow of the revolution and undermines the revolution at any cost, I don't believe that they should get rid of that restriction on free speech, right? So everything is political. And this is what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a political assault on those who speak out against empire. That is what the banning of RT is. That is what taking RT America and shutting it down, right? That's what this all is about. So we have to make sure that not only are we talking about how that is wrong, how that is against the interests of the people, it's against the interests of peace, but we also have to be clear about the politics of all this, right? Who is spearheading this charge to suppress the right of independent journalists to do what they need to do, right? To do what they should be doing, which is exposing power and ensuring that people are informed about how their government, how their society operates. That is the duty of independent journalism. That the first duty is to the truth. And when you have a state, when you have an imperialist state like the United States, like its imperialist allies, when you have these governments so willing to suppress speech that they don't like, suppress content that they don't like, suppress ideas that they don't like, and honestly suppress the truth, which of course they don't like, then it makes independent journalism incredibly difficult to undertake. And that's been my experience. My experience is that independent journalism is an incredibly difficult task. It's an incredibly difficult job, if we call it a job in the career sense. Essentially, independent journalism is an impossible job in that way, because there aren't many people who are willing to employ you to do that work. I mean, RT, Press TV, these outlets were some of the few that ever extended any kind of offers in that way, right? Only international media has ever really done that, because a lot of US based outlets just don't have the resources, right, to elevate voices like ours, to elevate anti imperialist voices. And so that is something that the imperialists well understand. This is about cutting off our channels to getting information out there. It is to isolate us further as the United States, NATO, the EU, as they figure out what they want to do to Russia, right? And this is the scary part about it, is that not only, and this is always the case, not only is it about suppressing dissenting voices, anti-imperialist voices, but it's also about figuring out and biding time to figure out what are we going to do to Russia? What are we going to do in this war? How are we going to assert dominance, assert hegemony, ensure that our interests are met in a period where any kind of escalation by the United States and NATO and the EU only prolongs this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So, I mean, those are my initial thoughts. I'll continue on. I'll probably stay on here for an hour or so. Please do like the stream while you're here. For those of you who are here, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. And the way that you support this show and the way you can support independent journalists all over who are losing their jobs, who are trying to do it on their own, like I am, on a full-time basis, and who are facing the censorship, which to a lesser degree I am facing it, to those folks like RT, those who work for RT America, etc. But you can support this channel, this work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. So let's just continue on here. So yeah, I mean, it's quite the situation to be in, and I think that we're all trying to understand how to move forward, right? And I think there are those who say, okay, we got to go onto these alternative platforms. And I'm definitely considering that. But I also think that there's another element to this and just moving on to another platform where we can all be. I think we also have to work together and be in solidarity with each other. And I hope that this moment fuels solidarity among independent journalists, especially those of us on the left who share a worldview and who share common interests for peace, against the anti-imperialism, and some kind of socialism, if we have any agreement on that, as well as all of the issues that we may agree upon or not that fall under those umbrellas, right? I think that's really what we need. And it's a very difficult thing, right, to do because there's so much work to do. If you are, for example, like myself, I find this very difficult when you're trying to write columns, when you're trying to do streams like this, when you're trying to just put out work that you're doing. There isn't always a lot of time for that collaboration. There isn't always a lot of space or energy for that collaboration. And so it does take a more mass effort to make it happen. It does take people who are willing to help put in that work to get that done. And so that is one of my hopes from here on out, is that these are conditions that are really crying for more collaboration. They're crying for more unity and solidarity among independent media and left independent media, content creators, journalists, those of us who are creating, dare I say, propaganda for the people, right? The people's propaganda, that propaganda which tells the truth. And there's a lot of people that think propaganda is just all lies, right? Because we often use it in this negative tone. But actually, propaganda, I think that comes from a little bit of an anti-communist root, where the agitation and the education that socialist movements, socialist countries, anti-colonial movements put out was called propaganda by those who were against it, right? By the colonialists and the imperialists during the Cold War. That's really where the root of this propaganda comes from in the negative light. But it's not just one single thing. Propaganda is simply disseminating information based on what your interests are. So if your interests are in the truth, if your interests are the betterment and the liberation of working people and oppressed people, then your propaganda is going to reflect that. If it's to reproduce a system of exploitation like imperialism that relies on endless war and austerity and super exploitation and the theft of the wealth of the vast majority of humanity and the destruction of the planet through climate catastrophe, then your propaganda is going to reflect that. And that's why the propaganda on that side happens to be rife with lies, distortions, half truths, and exaggerations, all for the purpose of reproducing that reality, right? So we are in a moment where we are under attack. And as I said before, I don't know how long this channel has. I don't know how long, we all have on these platforms, those of us who are putting out this narrative, because this isn't going to be the only time. Okay. So the Russia-Ukraine war is a flashpoint. I've been saying this since this war began. It is really a watershed moment in history because it reflects what I think will be many moments in history from here on out that will reflect the same problem and reflect this same development, which is that this new Cold War has been escalated, has been pushed to the fore to the point where the space for any kind of diplomacy, for any kind of détente, so to speak, is being eroded. And that means that out of the new Cold War will come hot conflicts. Back in the first Cold War, China and the Soviet Union, and then we can talk about China. They both wanted relationships with the capitalist world from the outset. This wasn't something, there's all these Fourth International Trotskyists and all these folks who say, oh, well, after Lenin died or after the new economic policy, the Soviet Union was just completely corrupt and it was this deformed state. They say the same about China, right? After the reform and opening up. And that's because they have this idea that so the Soviet Union and China were building some kind of purist socialist society. But in fact, if you read the early works during the revolution, 1917 of Lenin, if you read the works of Mao up until the revolution, up until the blockade of China, which happened very quickly after the revolution, you'll see that there was all kinds of hopes to have normalized relations with the capitalist world and that they were willing to give assurances to the capitalist world that, look, we just need to repair our societies. Our societies are underdeveloped. They're extremely poor. We can't go on like this, right? We need some time. We don't want conflict, right? These social societies weren't saying, okay, we had a revolution in China and the Soviet Union, so let's go overthrow the United States or European capitalism. No, that wasn't in the objective sense what anyone was thinking. There was a broad vision among some sections of these revolutions that said, yeah, we want to see an internationalist we want to see this spread across the world, but it has to be done right through the self-determination of those who are fighting for that, right? And we'll give support, which is what China did with Korea, what the Soviet Union did for countless liberation movements, right? That's what happened. They gave direct support, but only when there was a revolutionary situation. The Soviet Union especially was careful about who they supported during these wartime years, right? From 1917 till after World War II. That whole period, the Soviet Union was very careful about how they supported revolutionary movements abroad because of this real threat of war with imperialism. So all of this is to say that Cold War that was going on with China and the Soviet Union saying, look, we want normalized relations. We don't want to We don't want imperialism to be destroying us. That still led to so many hot wars, right, during that Cold War period. And that was because the United States just wasn't having it. The United States and the European imperialists just were not having the existence of socialism in the world. NATO was formed on that basis. It was formed to confront the Soviet Union. NATO literally absorbed Nazis, like Alfred Hausinger, right? He was fourth in command, I think, or third in command to Adolf Hitler. Absorbed these forces into major institutions, scientific, military, etc., all to fight this Cold War against the Soviet Union. So hot wars are inevitable when these are the maneuvers that are taken by hostile imperialist powers. That's why Russia-Ukraine conflict is happening. It's not happening because Russia just one day woke up and said, we want to take Ukraine. No, it's happening because Russia has been invaded many times before in its history. And I'm going to talk about this in a webinar on Monday. But Russia was invaded right after the Soviet Union formed, 1918. Was invaded by like a dozen imperialist powers. The United States itself sent like 12,000, 13,000 troops. They fought on the side of the White Army. I think something like 7 to 12, 5 to 10 million people died during the Civil War in the Soviet Union, which was a counter-revolutionary war. And that was because the counter-revolutionaries had the backing of major imperialists. Fast forward to World War II, the Nazi Germany used all of the strength, industrial strength that it gained, in part because the United States and the West were helping generate this industry in Germany, thinking that it was really ripe for exploitation, and then Germany just ended up becoming a powerhouse. They used all of that to invade the Soviet Union and kill 27 million more people. So Russia has a deep experience with what it means to be invaded and what it means to be threatened by the West, by imperialism. So that isn't even to say that NATO has conducted hot wars throughout its history, right? The war in Yugoslavia, which destroyed Yugoslavia, very close to Russia, then admitted many of those broken up states into NATO. I mean, that's a war of aggression that no one ever talks about, but Yugoslavia was a watershed moment in this NATO expansion, because that happened from the mid-90s, early 90s to mid-90s. It didn't end until 1999 when NATO absolutely leveled Yugoslavia and officially helped break it up. But that brought NATO just ever more closer to Russia's border. And since 1991, NATO has expanded. I mean, 1997 even, NATO has expanded 14 times, which, given the threat that NATO has always posed to Russia from the Soviet era into now, and given how close it is, and given how much it coordinates with Ukraine, given how NATO has literally supported Canada, the United States, etc., have supported Nazi forces inside of Ukraine, committing a slaughter of eastern Ukraine, Donbass, right along Russia's border. Well, you have a recipe, a powder keg for this kind of offensive. And so that's why we're here. And that's why we're being silenced when we say this, right? And so it is just so important that, yeah, we come together, that we understand this history, and that we also understand that cold wars lead to hot wars. This is going to be an enduring theme that I talk about throughout this, is that militarization, economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, political corruption and meddling, right? Intervening in civil society through the National Endowment for Democracy, this kind of soft power, imperialism, all of it, right? We can take it all together, and all of it leads. It's all an equation that leads to hot wars. So we might not have been able to predict that Russia-Ukraine would be that hot war. And God willing, we were in Russia and China, and everyone was doing their best to prevent that from happening, on a global scale between these big powers. But nonetheless, that is the trajectory, a dangerous trajectory. And the suppression of RT, the banning of RT, the banning of media that the US doesn't like, that comes or at least originates in countries that they have this new Cold War agenda against. It sends not only a dangerous message, but it also escalates this new Cold War. It places this information warfare to the front of the battle and the struggle. And so that's what we're all in. We're in this struggle against information warfare, and we have to be vigilant and continue to do the work and not be intimidated, not silence ourselves, continue to put out the message, and allow for more opportunities for cooperation and solidarity. So, with that said, I think one of the unfortunate things that has happened here during the Russia-Ukraine war is that this narrative is consolidating, that the NATO line, the imperialist line, it is being taken as fact, it is being swallowed as fact. And one of the ways I've gauged this is through just some basic commentary I've made about the character of imperialism, which I think I will spend the last 10, 15 minutes talking about. Imperialism, right, is a word that the ruling class, the establishment, didn't really like to use until this strategy of great power competition and this new Cold War on Russia and China, where now Russia and China are being depicted as these imperialist powers, these new colonial powers, all this nonsense, a real just nonsensical, insulting kind of characterization of these countries. But nonetheless, that is how the ruling class now, the US ruling class and the Western imperialists are deflecting from their own shortcomings. They're saying, oh no, these are the countries that are plundering Africa and debt trapping Latin America, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think it's interesting that we do have these think tanks and even the corporate media sometimes using this word imperialism, because now we have the duty, even more so, to define what that means. And when I said that Putin and Russia are not imperialists, right? That Vladimir Putin is not an imperialist and that Russia is not an imperialist country. I mean, I've never had so many replies in my Twitter feed, just completely going mad and insane about that conclusion. And so it's important to define what imperialism is. And most people, when they hear imperialism now, they just think, oh, it's just any kind of country that wants to take over other countries, right? So that means that the Mongolian Empire was imperialist. That means that the medieval empires, with the Roman Empire, all of these like ancient societies, that they were imperialist because they at times waged wars to expand to some degree. That imperialism is just expansion. And Russia and China, yeah, they're imperialist because they're seeking to expand. Now, this doesn't get into the fact that that's just blatantly incorrect, right? China is not expanding anywhere. China has one military base that was at the request of Djibouti itself, right? It doesn't expand anywhere militarily, and it also economically does things in a different way from the IMF, which literally does expand into countries and say, okay, if you're going to get aid from us, we're going to need privatization from you. China doesn't do that. China doesn't privatize Greece's economy. China doesn't privatize Portugal's economy. China doesn't go all across Africa and Latin America looking to indebt them and then siphon off all of their natural resources for absolutely nothing in return but poverty. That China doesn't do that. But yet it's imperialist because it's seeking to expand. And that's why these abstractions need to end, and we need to define what imperialism is. Imperialism is a system of monopoly capital. It is a system of capital. It is the stage of capitalism where finance and monopoly capital reign and rule. And so if you look at the social and economic character of Russia, that is just not Russia. And some people are trying to say, oh, well, Lenin said that Russia was imperialist in 1916. Well, that was before the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And Russia, indeed, while an underdeveloped country, was attempting to develop itself in an imperialist manner, meaning that it was trying to hasten the capitalist mode of production and move into uh, monopoly and finance capital. But Lenin said over and over again that that just wasn't possible under the current world situation. And it maintained pre-capitalist relationships, feudal relationships, all the way up until the revolution, right? Even after the 1905 so-called bourgeois democratic revolution, capitalism really didn't move that much forward in Russia because, well, there was just a constant assault. There was civil war. There was just so much economic backwardness. And of course, right, the Social Democrats, liberals, they were so infantile and so greedy that they didn't really want to change the czarist, autocratic, feudalistic order. They didn't even have the will to open up the society to speed up development. It wasn't until the Soviet Union came to power that economic modernization for that period started to occur. And even then, there was a universal blockade from the imperialists of the Soviet Union where a lot of technology was just out of reach. And also, there was just such a need to focus on military development that it did take away from other areas of Soviet society. But nonetheless, the Soviet Union grew incredible amounts during, especially the post World War II era when Reconstruction was finally possible. But even up until that point, there was just so much industrial growth, despite all the damage that these wars did. The Soviet Union was so resilient in that way, if we look at it from that perspective of being a society constantly under siege. But nonetheless, imperialism is the system of finance and monopoly capital. And so we have to ask ourselves, is Russia dominated by finance and monopoly capital? Why is it that Russia actually has far more state owned industries in these areas, especially in the realm of energy and finance, than the typical neoliberal imperialist economy that you see in the United States, Western Europe, and some other places? Well, it's because Russia was at one point a socialist society, and then that society was absolutely obliterated and turned into one of the poorest, most underdeveloped capitalist countries in the world, right? By 1999, Russia was so poor that people were dying at rates and they were dying at ages that reflected wartime conditions, right? Life expectancy had plundered by 6, 7, 10 years for large segments of the population because of a lack of access to just basic necessities and goods. It was quote unquote placed in this third world condition. And so, hate to say it, but countries that are placed under those kind of neo-colonial, you could say, although I wouldn't say Russia was a neo-colony to anybody. It was definitely being plundered. It was definitely being dictated by Western outside forces during the shock therapy period. But it's a little simplistic to say that it was a straight up neo-colony. I think it was more like a chaotic and extremely neoliberalized society that just buckled under the weight of those contradictions. And so its economy is still quite small, right? Russia has grown a lot since Vladimir Putin and the United Russia Party stabilized things starting in 2001. Certainly, there has been a lot of economic integration that Russia has attempted to achieve with Eurasia, and there has been a reining in of the oligarchs that were produced overnight in some cases after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they essentially took all of their wealth elsewhere and left Russia to starve. And so Vladimir Putin and the United Russia Party reversed that to a degree. And so that meant that Russia would have to start from scratch, really. That Russia was no longer this developing, burgeoning socialist modern society that, to be honest, from the 80s onward, even the late 70s onward, was stagnating because of all of the pressures, because of the Afghan Soviet, quote unquote, the Afghan Soviet war, because of that Brzezinski model war that just really damaged the Soviet Union, because of a whole lot of factors. The Sino-Soviet split. There were so many factors that weakened the Soviet Union and began the internal stagnation. But nonetheless, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia's position in the world economy also collapsed. And it hasn't necessarily recovered. I think Russia's economy is roughly the size of Texas, and it mainly exports raw materials, sort of like a neo colony, except Russia does have a degree of sovereignty, which has allowed it to restructure its economy independently in some ways and shield itself from the worst excesses of the neoliberal, capitalist, and imperialist world order. But that doesn't make it imperialist, right? Because to be imperialist, you have to, one, export capital, not just export raw materials that create capital, but export capital itself. So there isn't a lot of Russian made high value goods coming out of Russia. And there's not a lot of super exploitation happening around the world just to feed the Russian economy. That is not the relationship that you see globally. You also don't see Wall Street like banks dominating Russian society because these banks are still quite infantile, still quite small in the private industry. And there has, because of all of these economic shock waves, warfare, etc., that is being waged. I mean, think about it now. The value of the ruble has plummeted. Finance capital worldwide is waging a war on Russia, and we're here talking about Russia being a society dominated by finance capital. If that were the case, there wouldn't be this financial war on Russia because Russia would already be completely and entirely plundered. Russia would be what the Soviet it was in 1991, right? That is kind of where we need to look at things. And we also have to remember that in this age of 21st century imperialism, the post Project for a New American Century, that the character of imperialism has also changed, right? In terms of the global landscape. So imperialism doesn't allow for competition in the same way that it did when Lenin first wrote Imperialism. It just doesn't, right? That's why you see these alliances, these monopolies, you see the integration of the EU, of NATO, you see how the United States has attempted to ensure that all of these imperialist countries that ally with it are nothing but junior partners. That's why you have these kind of alliances, and the US is always in the lead. That's why you always have the US trying to assert its economic dominance and actually try to cut off Europe from Russia. It's because the United States in imperialism, it's still built on this competition. And at this stage, monopoly capital doesn't have much room for competition. There isn't that much room for it. So what is being done is there is a stifling, a complete sort of a monopolization process happening where a country like Russia is never going to be let into the club, right? And Paul Wolfowitz, right, the sort of doctrinaire of the Bush's policy and now the U.S. policy of full spectrum dominance, literally said this. He said that the United States will never let Russia be anything but a contained country, regardless of whether it's friendly or not. It's going to be contained. And so that's why I say Russia is not an imperialist country, because even if it wanted to, even if there was this impetus of Russia's leadership and Russia's economy, right, and its capitalist elements to be reaching the stage of imperialism, to get to that stage, the United States and its allies won't let it. And so that's I think that's very important. That imperialism is not just some abstract, oh, you want to be an empire, oh, you want to expand. Even if we concede that Russia's motives are expansion in some ways, even if you want to concede that, I'm not going to concede that personally because I don't believe it. But if you want to concede that Russia's goal is not a multipolar world, is not one where its sovereignty is protected, is not one where it's allowed to develop and then wherever it goes, because I don't think we know which way Russian society is going to go from here on out. Even if we concede, okay, Russia's all about expansion, even then, you can't consider imperialist because its aims for expansion are always going to be suppressed by actually existing imperialism. So we have to get that, I think, through the heads, or maybe we won't get that through the heads of those who disagree with us, but we need to approach imperialism in this way, in the objective sense, in the sense that the United States, Europe, these are societies that are dominated by the banks, that are dominated by finance capital, by huge monopolies on all levels, whether it's here in the media with big tech and then the concentration in the media, whether it's in the banking sector and big finance. You have a handful of corporations there in all sectors, fossil fuels, energy. It's all concentrated to this degree, and it all goes back to finance, right? You hear this corporate debt problem, corporate debt, corporate debt. Well, that's a problem of imperialism because these corporations are now indebted to finance capital because finance capital is hegemonic. It has ascended into that position. That is what imperialism is. And so some people like to quibble and argue and say, okay, well, imperialism, there was still finance capital during the colonial period, during when the big waves starting with Spain and going all the way to Western Europe and their colonization processes in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And yeah, I mean, if you want to use imperialism in that sense, I'm not going to be mad at you, but I do think that there is a difference between colonialism, which is still based on a more backward stage of capitalism, this real extractive stage, the stage where it's purely about maintaining this kind of dominance, which is meant to advance the capitalist system in the quote unquote mother country, where the mother country is still in this industrial phase and attempting, and there's still sort of this so-called free market. I won't even call it free market, but there's still a much larger realm, much larger stage for competition. I don't think we can call that stage of capitalism imperialism just yet. That doesn't negate the brutality of it. That doesn't negate the fact that people were being killed, murdered, these genocidal campaigns. It doesn't mean that racism was somehow less bad in that phase. No, right? This is not a comparison between which one is worse, right? Colonialism, like what existed in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, 19th century, into the 20th century, or imperialism in the modern era. That's just ridiculous to make comparisons like that because, right, millions upon millions upon millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of people were killed under the early stages of capitalist development. Very brutal. And there wasn't a socialist alternative. There were just forms of pre-capitalist development, more socialistic kind of development, communal development that occurred, but wasn't able to withstand the onslaught because of the huge differences, the onslaught of imperialism because of the huge differences in development. So we have to understand, I think, reality. This is what Marxism is, understanding how reality, how history, how political economy, how societies develop scientifically through stages, through modes of very early, backward kinds of development at all levels, right? At whatever social system you're talking about, from the ancient, more communal societies all the way to capitalism, right? Starting from this low level and moving into more advanced stages of growth. And in that these economies are always trying to move in this way to advance themselves to the next stage until the contradictions of this process run into, I think, their logical conclusions, right? So these contradictions inevitably give way to revolutions, right? To transformations when they reach their logical conclusion, when the contradictions reach this point of a break and of collapse, of crisis, That's what we've seen throughout history. That's why capitalism is not a permanent system. It hasn't always existed. That's why socialism emerged out of capitalism. It's because these contradictions are always developing and always changing. And so, right now, we have the capacity to analyze Russia for how Russia is right now after this experience of being a semi-feudal country that tried to cosplay imperialism and capitalism and empire before the Russian Revolution. Post-Russian Revolution, the attempt to build socialism for the very first time under a world capitalist dominated order. And then the collapse of the Soviet Union, which brought Russia into a modern form of incredible backwardness, stagnation, and crisis, took Russia back so many years and decades of development, destroyed and devastated the society to this period where Russia is rising, so to speak, but does not have either the global context and situation as well as even the internal mechanics to become an imperialist society. And so I will wager as of right now that Russia is not imperialist and that Russia cannot become imperialist because it simply will not be allowed on the one hand, and on the other, I think that there are contradictions in society, the nostalgia for the Soviet Union, the increasing popularity of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, and the increasing dissatisfaction with the fact that while reform has happened and there is trust in a modicum of popularity in the government, there is also dissatisfaction with life in general because the reforms under this kind of global situation, they don't happen fast enough, quick enough. So we don't know where Russia or Russian society will go, but we know from here that it is not imperialist. So I wanted to get that out there, guys, because yeah, I received a lot of backlash for this. I received a lot of backlash, and it seems like these trolls just come out now because I guess there's a reason to talk about Russia again, so they want to come out and flex their muscle. But nonetheless, reality is reality, and you can't change it just because you don't like Russia, right? Feel what you want about Russia. I mean, I'm sure nobody there really cares about what you think. You can feel however you want to feel about Russia if you want. But I think on principle, if you want to argue about imperialism, then you have to look at it objectively and you have to look at the situation for what it is and not for what you want it to be. And then also, if you're going to be useful at all, if you're going to want to be a useless pawn of imperialism, you can be that. You can just peddle the new Cold War and talk about how, Russia is just the worst enemy of humanity right now. I mean, that's what we're confronting at a mass level in so many ways. But for those who are serious, right, who are serious about trying to understand this, well, then you got to do a little bit more work than just defaulting to the establishment position, to honestly the imperialist position, imperialism calling imperialism, the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, it's just absolutely pathetic, but that is the situation we're in. The situation we're in is dire in some ways. But again, watershed moments are both dire, right? They're both chilling, they're cold, they're harsh, they're full of crises, they're full of backlash, they're full of repression. But at the same time, watershed moments also open up so many opportunities. Like I get excited when I think about the opportunity to talk about these kind of things, to really have the opportunity to raise these questions, to raise these issues in a way where people will actually start listening, right? And so crises really tell us a lot about where people are at, where the movement is at, where the class struggle is at. And while it may be at a low point, I think that the outcome of this Russia Ukraine crisis is going to just monumentally shift global relations, and it cannot but have a massive effect on us here in the United States, on if you're in Europe or the Western world or wherever you're at. It's going to affect everybody in the world, and it already is. I mean, the gas prices, the energy prices are astronomical. The propaganda is intense. The economic crisis is coming, and it will likely be very, very hard. And it will likely come. Where are we? We're in March of 2022. It is likely going to develop into the midterm elections and shape those. It is, I don't see the United States and NATO being able to maneuver in any kind of way where there will be a, a de-escalation which can take this issue into a positive place for Democrats, for just the legitimacy of the state itself. I don't think that this is going to get any better. And no State of the Union address is going to just magically correct the situation. I don't think that any side of the ruling class in the United States is going to benefit too much domestically from this war, no matter how much people think and poll and say that we agree with it or whatever. I don't think it's going to, in the long term, have any kind of benefits for the legitimacy of this social system. That is going to be one of the huge impacts of this crisis. But then I think at the global level, right? I think at the global level, while the West and the United States scramble to, they're going to be scrambling to maintain their stability amid what is an earth-shattering economic war that they're waging. While that is happening, you will see Russia restructure. You will see Russia accelerate its role and place in this multipolar world. There is no doubt that Russia-China relations will get even stronger. They were strong before the new Cold War. They got stronger during the new Cold War, and they are only going to become stronger now that Russia is going to need stronger friends. And I think one of the interesting developments that has come out of this is this whole attempt by the United States to get Venezuela to drop its relations with Russia. Essentially, the United States was, this is what's incredible. Joe Biden's administration went to Venezuela, went to Nicolas Maduro, who they don't recognize as the president of Venezuela. They recognize Juan Guaido. Yet they go to Nicolas Maduro in this time of desperation, right? Because of what's happening in the energy sector. And they say, okay, President Maduro, or just Nick, hey, Nick, we don't recognize you as president. We're starving your country with sanctions. But could you have a new election? Could you drop your ties with Russia? And then we won't get rid of all of the sanctions, but we'll let you maybe into the SWIFT system. And so Venezuela says, wait. Can we at least get Citgo reinstated? Can we at least have fewer sanctions? Can we really normalize that situation? And the United States says, no way. And we're not going to do anything if you're president, right? Because that's what the new elections is all about. So imagine that. Imagine the United States coming to Venezuela. This is how desperate they are. This is what they know. They know that the multipolar world is a threat to this hegemonic orientation that the United States is taking. So they go to Venezuela and they say, no. We want you to regime change yourself. And then we'll let you maybe into the world financial system again. But we won't get rid of all of the sanctions. Not all of them. And we won't even give you what you want, which is just to have Citgo be legitimized again so that you have more access to make some profits from your massive oil industry. No. Just take these small crumbs and give us what we want, which is you to decouple from Russia. Decouple from Russia, that friend of yours that has given you so much security and comfort through this economic war that we've been waging on you. So yeah, forget those vaccines, forget that support militarily, forget that economic assistance, forget all of it. Dump Russia and come with us. I mean, that's just how desperate and just how honestly, in the objective sense, and in a lot of ways, weak the United States is. The only way that it can assert its dominance is by the means of war. That is where the United States is at, and that means a multipolar world, which doesn't need to wage war at all, right? Open warfare is actually frowned upon by Russia, by China, even though Russia's in amidst a war. The vast consensus in this multipolar kind of world that's being built in the countries that are in it is that no, 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 no. We want we want peace as long as peace is possible, right? So peace is where we're going, what we're going for. UN Charter is what we're going for. And that's because these countries don't need to be in a war. Russia feels like it needs to be in a war right now, and you can disagree or agree with that however you see fit. But for the most part, right, despite all of the aggression, China, Russia, that Russia is facing, that China is facing, Venezuela, Cuba, that all these countries are facing, they don't put war at the top of their agenda. They put it at the very bottom. All of them believe in self-defense and the right to defend themselves and assert self-determination, but none of them use war as a means to get what they want, right? They use diplomacy, they use cooperation, they use the mechanisms of the UN body. They use their own capacity in institutions, both multilateral and bilateral, to get things done. And so, with that said, that is a threat. Just that alone. We're not even talking about the specific systems, right? China's socialist, highly advanced market economy, Nicaragua's socialist system. These systems are themselves individual threats to empire, but it's this multipolar world where all of them can coexist and benefit from each other. That's what is really threatening here. And that is guaranteed to accelerate in the coming period. Guaranteed with this Russia Ukraine crisis. Russia right now has no other choice, even if it wanted to. One of the really interesting shifts in tone for Russia is how all the way up into the Obama period and the Trump period, even early, there were talks of we want to be integrated with Europe and the United States. We still want a partnership. We still want cooperation. We still want to be close to you. But through the Trump period, with all the pressure that was placed on Russia during even that time, and now into the Biden period, where everything has kind of fallen apart in the way of U.S.-Russia relations. Russia isn't saying that anymore. Actually, Russia's most recent demands, if you read them, are we want Ukraine to enshrine neutrality in its constitution and recognize Crimea as Russian territory, recognize, of course, Donetsk and Lugansk as independent states. We want the full demilitarization, and of course, we want NATO with the neutrality clause in the constitution to be completely out of Ukraine's picture. But those kind of hard demands just show that Russia is not playing ball anymore. Russia is saying, no, our interests are too important. And so it is up to the United States, it's up to Ukraine, it's up to NATO to correct the situation. And so whatever you think about this intervention of this offensive, right? And I don't take a hard position for or against because I don't think I have enough information. I do know what is real and what is not real. So I know what is not real is that Russia is not just waging this war of obliteration and annihilation in Ukraine. That's not happening. But of course, war is ugly and war can unfortunately ensnare everybody in society. But I do think Russia is being more targeted than anything you'd ever see from the United States and NATO. And we don't actually know hard facts about Russia's motivation other than the objective conditions that kind of led to the intervention. But we don't know the minute, specific, concrete military to military, intelligence to intelligence reasons why this particular event happened. And so until then, I refrain from saying, okay, yeah, I'm wholesale against it or I'm wholesale for and I'm on the side of Russia. At this moment, things seem a little bit more complicated. But what I do know is that there's only one solution to this crisis, one, and that is that the United States and NATO disband, right? That alliance, that NATO itself is abolished, and that the U.S. and right ends that partnership, ends that alliance, that they are abolished as a military alliance. That's it. That the U.S. NATO alliance is gone. That is the only solution, because no matter what can be brokered out of this conflict, no matter what happens in this conflict, we can guarantee, and Russia knows this, and I think everyone in the region that is paying attention knows this, Ukraine is just a chess piece. It's just a vassal state. It's not European. Stop it. Just stop. It's not Europe. It's it's a pawn. It's a vassal. It's a client state. The United States and NATO treat it like a second-class country of the world. It is just to be stepped on. It's just for them to launch their new Cold War against Russia. It's not European. They're not going to fast-track EU membership. They're not going to let Ukraine into NATO so long as conditions make it very untenable for that to happen, right? In terms of diplomatically and public relations, and what would Russia do? I mean, if Ukraine was, if Ukraine was admitted to NATO, I do think we might have a third world war, and I think that's why they also won't listen to that creep Zelensky, Vladimir Zelensky, the begging puppet, wanting a no-fly zone over his own country. Some patriot he is, right? I mean, give me a break. No fly zone. You saw what happened in Yugoslavia, dude? Did you see what happened in Libya? See what happened? See what was going to happen in Syria? It's nuclear war when you call for a no-fly zone. It's not this ridiculous conception that the media is trying to portray. It's not, oh, we're just protecting airspace. No, it's actually providing airspace to NATO so that they can shoot down the opposing forces both in the air and on land. When Libya had the no-fly zone placed upon it by NATO, it wasn't just planes that were being shot down. Actually, Libya did not have a functioning air force. Libya had its infrastructure completely destroyed with tens of thousands of NATO sorties, water systems, schools, hospitals, etc. That's what was targeted. That's what would be targeted by NATO if there was a no-fly zone over Ukraine in order to eliminate Russian forces. And they don't want to do that. One, because I think that NATO understands that Ukraine has to be somewhat functional for it to be useful against Russia in this new Cold War. I do truly believe that. I do truly believe that they don't want to sink Ukraine's economy into wartime conditions, like is kind of what's happening right now, but they don't want to worsen that situation. They also don't. I do think that there are, at the very least, a level-headed imperialist mindset of, okay, this is not the time for nuclear war for us, where we don't have our objectives met. This isn't time to press the button, right? We have certain objectives that need to be met. The containment policy is good enough for now. And even though all signs point forward with this policy that we're waging to nuclear war, we're not going to escalate it based upon this second-class vassal state country. I mean, that's really the mentality of NATO. That's the mentality of the EU. I mean, that's the mentality. I mean, that's what imperialism is. It doesn't care about Ukraine. It doesn't care about Ukraine. It cares about what can Ukraine do for it. What can it do for them? It doesn't care about what they can do for Ukraine. Ukraine is just a launching pad, just like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They're just less valuable launching pads because Ukraine, it's this breadbasket. It has a lot of wealth that can be plundered. It's so strategically located, right? It's a little bit more useful. It doesn't just have to be a place where you put missiles and troops and do trainings. And, there's a lot more in Ukraine that they can suck out of it. And so we have to start talking about it like this because this is a moment, I think, that is going to accelerate a very positive development despite the hardship. And so as revolutionaries, we have to understand that hardship is inevitable, right? Hardship is inevitable in this struggle. whether it is we engaging in political activity where we are and facing just enormous odds, right? Enormous odds. This police state is fierce. This economy makes us desperate, sucks away our time and our energy and our mental health. Racism divides and circumscribes certain oppressed sections of the population into conditions of depravity, destroys the lives of people, imprisons more than 1 million indigenous, black people, etc., right? Political prisoners, the suppression of dissent, the censorship of RT and these independent media in general, of anti-war voices, all of this, right? All of this really influences how we both move forward and how we retreat as leftists, as revolutionaries, as people who want to see a social transformation of this society. And so we have to keep a cool head. We have to ultimately do the work of helping our forces, those of us that we're working with, those of us that we're organizing, that we're educating, that we're agitating, to understand the moment that we're in and to help us move to a position where this huge question, maybe the question of our era of imperialism and anti-imperialism, that struggle, right? I don't think there's ever been a time where that struggle has been more important. It's always been at the top in a lot of ways. But at this moment, it's so critical given where this new Cold War is headed. We have a duty to make sure that that is part of this overall struggle, especially when we see so-called progressives, so-called leftists, willing to drop any kind of principles around peace when it comes to countries that the US, that the West doesn't like, that they are waging this propaganda campaign against, and ultimately that they are attempting to overthrow and destroy in order to maintain this very system of exploitation of capitalism and imperialism that these progressives and leftists say that they want to end. So that's our task. That's where we ultimately need to be, and that's how we ultimately need to behave. So you're here now. Like the stream, definitely subscribe to the channel, definitely hit that bell for notifications. And the way you support this channel, the way you support this work, if you can give any amount per month, is going to patreon.com/Danny Haiphong, helping keep this work sustainable. And I do appreciate all of my supporters, all of those people who come join these streams, no matter if you're able to subscribe or not. It really is humbling. I do have a new article out on Substack, so we'll probably go 20, maybe 15 more minutes if you want to ask questions, maybe bring them down to the bottom of the chat. And I don't know if I'll look through the whole chat, but if you wanted to do that, that would be great. I can answer some of those as like a kind of the way to conclude this. And then I'll also announce some things. So I um I have a new article on Substack. All right. So go read that. I didn't review it. Unfortunately, I think events really prompted me to focus on the censorship issue and all of that. This new Cold War now on Russia, right? So I'm focusing a lot more on that. So I do have a few announcements, and that's one of them. Is I have a new article about China's 2 sessions and how it relates, or how we can compare it to Joe Biden's State of the Union and the differences between where China and the U.S. are going in their terms of their trajectory. It's an interesting article. So in the description, you can read that on Substack. You can subscribe there for free, or you can do an annual membership. That would be very helpful, paid membership. But nonetheless, I have a new article there just released yesterday, so go check that out. Tomorrow, I do plan on doing my call-in podcast. There's been a lot of issues I've been having with it, with my device and whatnot. I won't get into it. It's been unfortunate in terms of getting it out there and clipping and highlighting it, but nonetheless, Cold War Brew, download the call-in app. So go to callin.com, or your Play Store or your App Store. Download that free app, this new podcast app. Join me 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Sundays. Cold War Brew. I'll probably do something on censorship in the new Cold War, so there may be some overlap here, but there is opportunities to directly engage with me. I do reserve half of the time. I do an hour, and then half of that time I am just chatting directly with you all, because its format is that you literally call in. So definitely do that. Support that. Subscribe to that podcast once you download the app, and hopefully I can see you tomorrow there. And in other news, there are very interesting events coming up. I did not link it in the description, but there is an event that I am a part of, and I will actually put it in the chat. I'm going to be part of a Ukraine webinar held by Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. That will be on 7 p.m. Eastern Time this coming Monday. I'm going to talk about Russia's perspective, and you've heard most of it, but I'm going to be adding in some, facts and analysis of like this history that Russia has and understanding why it might respond in this way. So I am trying to find the information for that webinar. I do have it on my Patreon right now. And so you can go to my Patreon if you subscribe and register there. But I'm going to try to put this in the chat as well. The links for registration. Okay. I'm copying them and going here. So yeah. Here are the links for registration in the chat now. It's kind of ugly, so let me actually do it one at a time. So yeah, you can register for the webinar here. And you can also, there's a Facebook as well, Facebook event. Pretty good. They're good comrades. Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. There's a lot of good co-sponsors to it as well. Definitely come through. I'll be speaking with Sarah Flounders, who I know well, very important socialist, anti-imperialist activist. Arnold August, who's a friend, also a supporter of my work, who I'm incredibly humbled by that. Ken Stone, the same. They're very supportive of what I do, and I'm very supportive of what they do. And so I always try to contribute to their efforts to spread an anti-war message in Canada. And they're very solid, very movement-oriented, class struggle-oriented. So you definitely should check them out and support their work. And other than that, March 19th, as you know, if you were on the stream with Ben Norton and Carlos Martinez, can you make sure to register for that event as well. Go to socialistchina.org or go to at Socialist China on Twitter. Follow them. I co-edit that publication, and register for our event on 21st Century Socialism, China, Latin America on the front lines. If you weren't there for the Ben Norton stream, that's okay. We did talk about how Dilma Rousseff, the PT leader, the Workers' Party leader, and former president of Brazil, will be the keynote. And we'll also have Ma Hui, who's an ambassador to Cuba, Chinese ambassador to Cuba. We have a great lineup for you. Carlos Martinez will be speaking. Ben Norton will be speaking. Camila Escalante will be speaking. It will be a very good event to talk about an incredibly important part of this multipolar struggle, which is China and Latin America's growing friendship and solidarity with each other, and how those relations are really taking us into a new era of socialist development. A very interesting topic, and one that you should definitely check out at the event. That'll be March 19th. I believe that'll be 9 a.m. Eastern time. I know, early for you Pacific time people and Eastern time people. We do it for the Chinese speakers. We do it for those who are out further east. So, but you should definitely check it out. It'll also be on YouTube afterward. And let me see if there are any questions, okay? Because I'm going to go through some of these questions after I talked about all these events. All right. So let's see. Are you on Odyssey or any alt platform yet? No, I am not, Jenny. That is something I will be exploring in the coming weeks as I start to figure that out. It's time consuming because I do, and I'm going to be also probably asking for some help. So if there's anybody out there, whether you're a subscriber on Patreon, I could definitely kind of like refund you. I could give you some, I have been able to preserve some of the support that I've gotten, and I will be looking for even just like short volunteer help where I can give you a little bit to just help me with some of these logistical things. That would be well deserved. I hate asking for as much as I am a socialist and comradely, I understand the material realities of things. So I don't like to do the thing where I say, okay, help me out. And I just expect that of you for free. No, 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 no. I don't want to do that anymore. It's very hard for me. I just, no, I don't want people doing labor for me for free unless, we're in a different system, like on a consistent basis. It doesn't feel good. So, especially when I'm not able to kind of give it back in a mutual way, given all the things that I have to do in my life and in just the work that I do. So, I'm looking through some of these questions now. So, stick around. Yeah, no, definitely more Margaret Kimberly. We're trying to schedule something, Lewis. So, she's definitely coming back. A lot of times I'm doing this kind of on the fly, so it's definitely difficult to coordinate, but we'll definitely do it. So Connie asked, is it possible to share recordings of Cold War Brew for your Patreon supporters who can't use the Callin app? Oh, okay. So if you can't use the Callin app, that is interesting. I mean, you can listen online, but yeah, you won't be able to participate. I don't know if I'm able to. I think I'm able to download the recordings. Again, I've been having a lot of tech issues, so once that's cleared up, hopefully I will be able to do more of these things in a better way and more effectively. But yeah, that's a good question that I will be exploring as I self-correct. So thanks, Connie, for that. So the first link, somebody says the 404 error. Oh, geez. All right, just go to the Facebook for now. I don't know what that's about. It might be because I copy and pasted it onto the chat. But I should probably make the Patreon post public. I will be posting it on Twitter and whatnot. So follow me on Twitter as well. So here we go. Do you think that there will be an official Stop Russian Hate campaign to take the edge off the Russophobia domestically, or are things too far gone for that now? Says where? Now, that's a really good question. So the Stop Asian Hate is really interesting. And I think because it reflects some political dynamics in the United States. So you do have younger Asian Americans, people of Asian descent in the United States. You do have kind of this longer history of more political involvement. I'm not sure if Russian community in the United States is in the position. I'm not sure. I don't know particularly if it's in the position to really stand up to this, especially given how there was a lot of migration from Russia, right, throughout U.S. history to the United States, but a lot of the newer waves, I think may not have the political orientation to even have that kind of campaign, lead that kind of campaign. So some of this too is that there is some blending that it's a contradiction, I think, for like the Russian community in the United States. There's like blending in some ways in terms of race. There's also like just the cultural enclaves that have definitely been built over the years, right? You have it here in New York City, um, in certain parts of Queens and elsewhere where there are like these deep Russian communities that have maintained a lot of cultural roots. But again, I'm not sure that they're in the position. Well, the Stop Asian Hate campaign, I feel like because there is more of a younger, intellectual, more academic community among the diaspora, that it's more likely that there's more of an integration in the society that's run up against this virulent racism in a lot of ways, right? So I also think that the anti-Russian racism, right, because it was steeped in anti-communism to begin with, and because there's a longer history of anti-Asian racism that predates the war on communism, predates the Cold War, I think it's a little bit different. So I'm not sure that the Russian community is in the position. I hope so. I hope that there will be that kind of campaign. Not because I want to see just some liberal campaign that will just say stop the hate, but I think those campaigns do offer opportunities to push the conversation forward and to try to define, well, what does it actually mean to counter Russophobia? But this is a chilling environment, and I think they're connected, right? So the attempts to demonize, dehumanize people of Asian descent, violently attack them, hurt them, create this anti China mentality is in part a reaction as well to this broader new Cold War mindset, which Russia is in the thick of that. And so I can't say that there will be. I don't want to say too far gone because I don't know. I don't have connections to the Russian community like that. So I definitely don't want to make any assumptions. It just feels like there's more likely to be fear in this situation than there is going to be an active response. Also, I do think this makes a difference, but I do think that there are more people in the diaspora, right, from Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, with Black Lives Matter and anti racism than maybe in the Russian community, at least just from observations and from what I was able to see in the 2020 protests, 2014 protests, just my own personal experience. It just seems like that's a little bit more of a reality. And I think that there's a complex history there that's just different than maybe what the diaspora Russian community, especially in the last 20 years plus of post-Soviet Russia, right? I don't know that generation is prepared to stand up even at this level. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So let's keep going. All right. All right. Let's see. So where are we? I don't see any more questions just yet. So Elizabeth said, "I'll help you. I have tons of time." That's really generous. Yeah, we can be in touch. Honestly, I have a lot of things going on as well. I have personal life, trying to figure things out. And I put so much time into this work that, even just taking the step. And some of the things I need help with will be kind of updating the channel. I want to update the channel art. I want to be able to put in videos kind of like I don't know, a logo or something. Like I want a new logo. I also need help editing videos. I don't know I don't know what the right video editor to use. I don't have all the time in the world to edit videos. So I'm trying to post daily on the channel because I think that's the only way this channel will be relevant. And that's part of the reason why I try to do these impromptu streams as well. So if you know anyone or want to reach out and can help with some of those things, I'm willing to, provide some compensation for your efforts on a it doesn't have to be like a total regular thing, like help me every day, but if there's a way to arrange something. So Jorge asked that. Thank you so much, Jorge, for asking that question. And a good comrade here says Odyssey automatically backs up your YouTube, so that's probably a place I'll be looking. Thank you so much. So it says Patreon has been censoring people. Yeah, I definitely know that. It's kind of the easiest way. It's honestly been the place where people have been more willing to provide support, right? So I do have other places like Substack, but it seems like people are more willing to do the monthly thing. So I'm still on there for now. I do understand the ramifications. So please do support me there if you can. Let's see if there's any. Let's see if there is any other questions. Look at this troll. I don't know if this is a troll, if this is a joke, but I kind of find it funny, so I'll post it. Danny, have you tried not eating avocado toast? I hear that's magic for finances. That's got to be a joke. I'm not gonna call you a troll. I don't know you, Patrick. So I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt that that's probably sarcasm. And I don't eat avocado toast often. Can't lie. Some places make it good, but it's always overpriced. So I don't really mess with it, honestly. And also the places that you go to get it when it's good and overpriced, just I can't be there. I just come from a background where it's just like these places, these like gentrified hipster establishments that are like, trust fund seed money kind of institutions. I just no, even when I moved to New York City, right? Luckily I'm married to someone from New York City who grew up there, so she is also like this. She does not like to eat at these new age places that are obviously just trying to wrestle all of your money away from you and give you subpar food. So I'm lucky in the sense that I can kind of maintain my desire to eat at more of the community places that have been around for a while. And usually avocado toast is not, although some places are adopting it. I gotta say, avocado toast has grown a universal appeal. That's I guess that's the magic of capitalism. When it's profitable, it will spread. So thank you so much, Sean. I'm very grateful for the work of Danny Haiphong, such a rare resource for truth. I really appreciate that. So let's see. I've never heard of Anthony Montero until hearing him on Danny Haiphong's podcast. What an excellent resource. Yeah, we're going to have him on and on. It's been hard to keep up, right? As you said, Margaret, as you all have made note, Margaret has been busy. We've all been busy. And yeah, I definitely want to get Margaret on here more. And we're definitely going to have another episode. Oh, I got to get on that. See, there's a lot of work. I got to get on that to set up another stream because we're going to try to find a few guests. And we're definitely going to have Tony on more because he was a staple of Black Agenda Report, and we definitely want to keep his voice circulating. Great guy, really nice guy. Met him a few times out in Philly. Has a good group of people around him that he does work with. So yeah, keep going. So anyway, I don't see many more questions here, and that's fine. So yeah, no, this was good. So okay, here we go. We have another comrade. How do I see this war unfolding and ending? The Prince, thanks for joining into this stream. Really appreciate it. So, yeah, well, how do I see this war unfolding? It's hard to say. One thing I have been saying is that this is going to go on for as long as the United States and NATO and EU are willing to take the economic hits for it, because I think that's really where the problem resides for them, for the aggressors, at least the foreign aggressors, if we want to call Russia an aggressor here, just for the sake of simplicity, although it's debatable, but for the sake of simplicity, let's say it's an offensive, right? So those who are waging aggression on the outside of this offensive to escalate it, to make matters worse, the US NATO alliance, imperialism, they really hold the cards here, because it's really all about Russia's core interests at the end of the day. And so for me, it's quite clear that Russia's core interests are not going to be abandoned by Russia and its leadership. That ship has well sailed. That's a fantasy for anyone who thinks Russia's going to snap the finger tomorrow and say, okay, we're done. You see this ridiculous propaganda coming out of the Telegraph and these Western tabloid corporate sources saying, oh, yeah, these Russian soldiers who were kidnapped by Ukraine or captured by Ukraine, they're saying that they've already lost the war and they plead for Russia to end the war. It's nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. There ain't no plea in the world that's going to end this war without Russia's core interests being accommodated in some way. Really, I mean, I don't think Russia's going zero sum necessarily. But unless they're taken seriously and treated like equals diplomatically, unless the United States and NATO stop saying Russia's the one who's not engaging in diplomacy, when literally there have been like 3 peace talks in the last 3 weeks that have gone sour, mostly because every time Russia puts forth its demands, Ukraine says, sorry, no, my NATO masters told me not to. This is going to keep going. So it could be a long one. But militarily, I think Russia's going to achieve their objective. I mean, I can't imagine anything else happening with the way that NATO is supporting Ukraine. I mean, weapons is not going to change anything. Weapons don't change the battlefield, right? Russia has the advantage. It has a superior military. It is moving forward in its objectives. And I do think that it will continue to advance in that way. But again, without its demands being met, advancements, right? It's like you can advance, you can place pressure, you can continue to wage this war, but if the other side is not willing to engage in peace talks in a serious way, I'm not sure how it really ends. And so, yeah, I mean, we could see temporary ceasefires, right? Almost like a grander scale of what we see with Ukraine in the way it treats East Ukraine, right? We could see temporary ceasefires that lead nowhere. We could see that. I'm not going to put it out of the question, but I do think that this war does not end until Russia has some kind of appeasement in the way of neutrality and Ukraine's constitution changing in that way, and for these republics to be recognized as independent states by Ukraine in its constitution, and also Crimea, which is a whole nother can of worms, which just shows how firm Russia is being, because Russia has already admitted Ukraine into the Federation, but Ukraine, obviously they think that Ukraine is gunning for Crimea too, which is not out of the realm of possibility. It is very possible that Ukraine, given its assault on Donbass, is also looking at Crimea. I mean, they don't recognize Crimea as Russia still. So yeah, that's where we're at. That's where we're at. And that's so ending, not sure. Unfolding, I could see temporary ceasefires here and there, but until the core interests are met, I don't see it. So yeah, avocados are in NYC are $1. Yeah, you go to certain places, definitely get them for cheap. So you can make your own toast. That's what I do. So Patrick, it was a dry joke like toast. It was a good one. And it was so good, I didn't get it. I don't always get the good jokes. All right, guys. So it looks like we're coming off at the end here. Let me see. Can you toast an avocado? Do not try to toast an avocado. Gross. It's like really hard to get good avocados though. They're in the city now. The grocery stores. I mean, grocery stores in New York City. Forget about it. These grocery stores are so so you got to go to local places, and they always have them. They're always so ripe. Like either crazy ripe to the point where they're rotten, or they're like too unripe. I don't know, man. Avocados, they're tough stuff. I like avocados, and they're healthy for you. You should eat them. Good for your heart. Revolutionaries got to stay alive. Have you linked up with Carl Za? I have linked up with Carl Za, and I have been thinking about linking up with Carl Za. One of my ideas for a stream in the future is to do an anniversary of our anti-Asian racism stream we did last March. Was it April? It was almost a year ago. And it was with Amanda Yi, Carl Za, Xiang Yu. Yeah, I want to get them back together to talk about this issue, and it might be amid this Ukraine-Russia war, so it might be a cool thing to do. But I have linked up with Carl Za in the past too. On July 4th, I did a stream with him. You can check that all out. It's on the page. I love Carl Za. He's a good good guy. Man, he's smart as hell. This guy knows China. He knows China. I mean, Chinese history, just overall. He knows it way better than I do. And he knows, I mean, he just history. He's just a real voracious, just intellectual mind. Great. So, how can I reach you, says Jorge, to help out? Oh, you can reach me, social media, DM me. If you can at me if I'm not already following you. I can I mean, you can email me. I don't know. I can put my email in, but I don't want to be flooded with emails because I'm really bad with that. So yeah, social media or Patreon. If you're already subscribed, you can message me. I would say those are the two best ways. And let's see. So someone says, has anyone else on here found common ground with the right on Russia, Ukraine? Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I gotta say that, yeah, the conservative right wing, I guess you could call them, even the Tucker Carlsons, yeah, they have a better position on this. It's so unfortunate because they have a better position on this than most of the left, but then they have a really terrible position on other matters like especially China, immigration, that kind of thing. It's tough. For me, if you show up, I'm not gonna counter. I'm not gonna like say, "Oh, you're right wing because you're saying good things about Russia." Like, no, I'm not gonna do that. So keep doing it. If you're on the right side on this question, if you're on the right, keep doing it. But yeah, we on the left have to make sure. I don't know, in terms of common ground, we have a peace movement, show up. Whoever builds it needs to show up. And then we need to have that struggle. But I've never seen, even when the right has good positions, they're not really the ones building the movements. They're not, they're saying they might tell the truth on these issues, but I don't really see them on the ground. I don't Even the libertarians, I don't really see them that much. I see them a little bit more. You'll see them a little bit more even actively, like, in the movement, and they can be super annoying to have conversations with about anything else than what you have common ground on. But that's neither here nor there because I'm not that kind of person that says, "Oh, yeah, don't work with anyone if they show up or whatnot to your thing and they're this or that." Like, no. If we have common ground on this issue, we work together. But we're gonna struggle on other things, obviously, and that shouldn't preclude us in that way. So skills and equipments, what we need. Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, I need some more time to think about it. In terms of equipment, I mean, I think I'm good for now with that. I'm trying to keep it simple. It's really just like the editing side and the side of just updating and making things look good, and then having some help with that stuff, and because that stuff takes a lot of time. I've recognized now that I'm posting daily, and it takes away from articles, it takes away from other stuff. So thanks for that, golden silence. So man, you guys really asking a lot of questions. I like that. Ask for help. Very much appreciated, comrades. You all, I'm very grateful for you while you're here. Definitely like the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and help my work out at patreon.com/Haiphong, because I do not want to, if I'm going to get any help, I am not going to not compensate to some degree, right? So that's how you support this show, and that's how you support this next step as I move towards figuring stuff out. Because yeah, I've been infected. And this next question, creative experiments, welcome, welcome. I know that you're frequently here. Has the removal of RT increased your self-censorship? Well, it's funny. I like to think that I have a filter, but not always. I don't always have a filter. So even today, like, I was thinking, oh man, there were even sometimes where I would reload the stream before I started, and it would say this video is not available. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm done. Like, I'm done. That's it for me. YouTube is done for me. Crap. I download most of the recordings, so I would be able to re-upload them somewhere. But I can't say it was in the back of my mind, like, oh crap, talk about Ukraine, talk about Russia. Is this going to happen? And then I did this stream, and I don't think I censored myself at all. So even though it's in the back of my mind, I would say no, because I don't know if I can. Because if you self-censor, then I think that there's just something about that for me. That's always been the case for me. And look, it's not like I don't think strategically about things. For example, during this whole COVID-19 stuff, I had subscribers on my Patreon who were all about the like lab leak and all about the like Barrington stuff. And look, you can have your positions on COVID all you want. I may have some differences. I definitely understand the concerns about state repression, and I saw that, I witnessed that all throughout this whole period of COVID, and I get it to some degree. But I'm also in favor of universal public health and methods that address pandemics that can be done in a way that's not repressive. It can be. It can be done in a way that's about protecting your health. Not done here, so I get it if you're angry about how it's done here. You lose your job, you lose your access to be able to go to things you used to do. You're basically living in a like a terrible society. Yeah, I get it. I'm living in the same one. I'm you know, I've been bored more so than I have not been bored since this pandemic started. I get it. But at the same time, like, um, I'm not, I'm not always, I'm going to kind of pick my battles, pick my fights. I'm not here to, just talk about everything under the sun to get clicks, to get hits. I have my expertise that I think I've developed, my role in this struggle that I think is important. I intervene in areas when I think I need to intervene on issues when necessary, right? So I'll engage in polemics and debates when necessary. Although, to be honest, nobody really asked me to debate. Maybe they think, I don't know. I've had a few people that I thought I was close to like debating. I don't like debating, but if you're going to ask me on your platform and whatnot, and get my message out there, I'll do it, but I don't seek it out for my channel. I'm not here for clickbait and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess for me, my work, all of our work has to be strategic. We can't talk about everything. We can't address everything. So I guess that's the only way that I would self-censor. But in response to the RT stuff, yeah, it definitely hit me. The RT banning and all that, it definitely hit me. But I never had this impulse to self-censor. Like once I started talking here, I just kept going, and so hopefully this video sticks around. I've been, I have monetized a channel, just I don't really turn it on because I'm not like, I don't know, I don't really want to give YouTube another $100, and maybe I should, but I'm much more about the Patreon and like subscribers helping me out directly and building that kind of base. I think that's so much more valuable, but I've been demonetized several times already, so that is what it is, right? That's just the reality. So Elizabeth said NATO exercises in Georgia. Where'd you go? There you go. Elizabeth says NATO. I did not know that. I've been doing so much work trying to like prepare for the things that are coming up for me that I haven't seen that, but that's true. Georgia, I mean, Russia and Georgia went to war with each other before, not just on this question, but NATO had something to do with it during that 2008 conflict. So that's troubling, right? These NATO exercises are troubling. So we're moving on. I don't see any more. Wow, you guys are active on here. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm reaching hour number 2. Carl just did a Twitter. I know Carl's. I told him. I messaged him, being like, "Dude, you got some stamina." Because I do these 2. This is 2 hours, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I gotta get off soon." 10 hours on a Twitter space. I don't know how you do it. They're amazing spaces, though. The Ukraine, Russia, China spaces. I think I participated in the first one, or at least the first one that I knew of, an early one. Haven't been able to get back since because, damn, it is hard. I can't make that kind. I don't know. That kind of time, there's just so many things. The US is a busy society. I mean, he's out in Bali, and probably lives a different culture, and I really envy him for that. But so keep going. Yeah, I got to get Carl back on the show. You're really reminding me about that with all these comments. Any thoughts on Howie Hawkins endorsing Russian sanctions? I didn't know that. That's unfortunate. I know that he's deviated on some positions of mine. So my only thoughts would be that's incorrect, and I would hope that he would reconsider. Sanctions on Russia only hurt everybody, especially Russian workers and ordinary people, but really everybody is hurt, including workers here. So there really is no benefit other than to imperialism. So I would hope that he would reconsider that and would be willing to engage with that position, because no matter what you think of Russia, these sanctions are criminal and they're an act of war. So you don't advocate for more war, right? If you want to see peace. I mean, that's just not how it works. Um, so that is about it, guys. So yeah, like the stream. Definitely do subscribe if you can to my Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. If you haven't watched the video, you can fast forward. I'll definitely take clips from this. I mean, you can definitely rewind and rewatch the video while you're doing that. Thanks so much. This was 2 hours of, I think, a really good show. And yeah, no, we'll definitely have Margaret sometime again this March. We're trying to get a couple of cool guests. I'm not going to tell you yet who we're thinking about, but definitely got to get that going. I got to focus. Thanks all so much for your kindness, generosity, of course. And we will be back again soon. I will be back again soon, maybe even sooner, as things develop. I continue to try to come on to do these more like update kinds of shows, right? So, and the streams are growing, albeit, I guess, at a slower pace and relatively to some who I don't think deserve it. But I'm not going to get into that. But um, keep supporting me, keep subscribing, like the stream before you leave. And then, of course, the best way to support this channel is on Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. That is in the description. And I appreciate all the generosity for whatever you can give. All right. Salute to all you comrades, and I will be back again soon. Peace out.